I am a retired forensic surveyor. For 30 years, I was the man the city called when $2 billion developers couldn't agree on where one skyscraper ended and the next began. I deal in millimeters, GPS satellites, and cold, hard cadastral data. My world is one of absolute boundaries. The oak tree was different. It wasn't just a boundary marker. It was a living piece of my family's history. My grandfather planted it in 1924, 3 years after he bought this plot of land. It survived the Great Depression, 3 major hurricanes, and the slow encroachment of the suburbs. It didn't survive Julian Vance. At 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the vibration hit my floorboards before the sound hit my ears. It was the rhythmic, guttural growl of a heavy-duty Stihl chainsaw. I didn't rush out in my pajamas screaming. That's what a Karen does. I sat on the edge of my bed, reached for my phone, and hit record on the voice memo app. Tuesday, October 14th, 06:14. Unauthorized power equipment operating on or adjacent to my northeast property line, I said, my voice as flat as a spirit level. I dressed in my work boots and a high-visibility vest. I didn't want to be a neighbor. I wanted to be a professional. By the time I walked out to the edge of my lot, the giant was already screaming its last. The white oak, 60 feet of canopy that shaded my entire back deck, was leaning at a sickening angle. A crew of 3 men in unmarked orange shirts were working the trunk. Standing by a sleek white Range Rover was Julian Vance. He was looking at a set of blueprints spread across the hood of his car, holding a lukewarm espresso. He didn't look up when I approached.
"You're the neighbor, right, Penhaligon?" Vance said, finally glancing over. He didn't wait for an answer. The tree had to go. It was blocking the sightline for the Phase 2 penthouse units. My architect said it was a visual nuisance. Don't worry, I looked it up. The local fine for unauthorized tree removal is $500. I've got the check ready.
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pre-written check. $500. It was an insult disguised as a convenience. To a man like Vance, a fine isn't a penalty. It's a line item in a budget. It's the price of a permit you buy after the fact.
"The tree is 4 feet inside my property line, Julian," I said. No anger, just the facts. Vance chuckled, a dry, corporate sound. "Is it? My site manager did a quick walkthrough with a laser tape. He said it was on the line. And even if it isn't, it's down now. Wood is wood, Arthur. Take the 500. Use it for some new landscaping, maybe some nice shrubs." "I won't be taking the check," I said. "Fine, suit yourself," Vance shrugged, turning back to his blueprints. "The city will mail me the citation eventually. I'll pay it then. Have a productive morning."
I didn't argue. I didn't mention timber trespass or treble damages. I didn't tell him that he had just committed a felony-level destruction of property. Instead, I walked back to my garage and opened my old equipment locker. I pulled out my Moleskine notebook. Entry 1, 06:28 a.m. Antagonist Julian Vance admitted to intentional removal of 100-year-old white oak. Rejected $500 settlement, documenting crew names and equipment serial numbers. Vance thought he was paying a $500 fee. He didn't realize he'd just signed a confession for a 6-figure liability. He saw wood. I saw a century of evidence. Julian Vance thinks the law is a suggestion for people with less money than him. He's about to find out that while money can buy a Range Rover, it can't move a property line. Not even by a millimeter. In the world of real estate disputes, I think is a death sentence. The data says is the executioner's blade. Julian Vance's site manager had done a quick walkthrough with a laser tape. In my profession, we call that guessing with a gadget. A laser tape measure is a tool for interior decorators. For property lines, you need the heavens. By 9:00 a.m., the crew had hauled away the main trunk of my oak, leaving nothing but a jagged, bleeding stump and a sea of sawdust. They thought they were cleaning up a crime scene. In reality, they were just making the survey markers easier to see. I spent the next 3 hours in my garage, calibrating my Leica TS-16 total station and my Trimble R12 GNSS receiver. These are instruments that cost more than Vance's Range Rover. They communicate with 24 satellites simultaneously to determine a position on the Earth's surface with an error margin of less than 3 millimeters. I walked out to the northeast corner of my lot. I didn't look at the stump yet. I looked for the monuments. Found it. A 3/4-inch iron pipe, rusted and driven deep into the soil 40 years ago. I set up my tripod over the pipe, leveled the instrument, and began the resection.
This is the process of tying my local position into the global coordinate system. Vance walked over from his construction trailer, looking annoyed. "What are you doing, Arthur? Building a fence. If you're planning on blocking my view, my lawyers will have an injunction on your desk by sunset."
I'm verifying the boundary, Julian, I said, my eye pressed to the optics. Standard procedure following a suspected trespass.
He laughed. "It's a tree. Give it a rest. My guys are starting the foundation pour for the luxury units tomorrow. We don't have time for your hobby."
I ignored him. I moved to the stump. I placed the prism pole directly in the center of the heartwood, the very core of the oak. I hit the trigger on the data collector. Ping. The screen flashed, lat 34.0522, long minus 118.2437. I pulled up the digital parcel map I downloaded from the county registrar's office. I overlaid my fresh coordinates. The center of the tree was exactly 4.2 feet inside my property line. Not on the line, not leaning over the line, deep inside. "Julian," I called out. He stopped, hand on the door of his trailer. "Just so we're clear for the record, you're starting the foundation pour tomorrow."
"Bright and early," he snapped. "Why? No reason, just documenting the timeline."
Vance went inside his trailer, slamming the door. He thought he was being assertive. I knew he was being reckless. In construction, if you build something on land you don't own or within a restricted setback zone, the remedy isn't a fine. The remedy is a bulldozer. I finished my survey and went back inside to make a phone call. I didn't call the police, they'd just call it a civil matter. I called Sarah Jenkins. Sarah is a consulting arborist. She doesn't trim hedges.
She's a PhD who testifies in court about the biological and economic value of legacy trees. "Arthur," she answered, "it's been a while. What do you have for me?"
I have a 100-year-old white oak, Sarah, or I did. Julian Vance's crew felled it this morning, intentionally. He offered me $500 to go away. There was a long silence on the other end of the line.
I could almost hear Sarah's mental calculator spinning. A century-old white oak in a residential zone. "Arthur, $500 wouldn't even cover the cost of the wood chips. Tell me you didn't touch the stump. I'll be there in an hour."
In the cold justice playbook, the first warning isn't a shout over a fence. It's a piece of paper that requires a signature. Sarah Jenkins arrived at 1:15 p.m. She didn't look like a gardener. She wore a tactical vest, carried a specialized DBH tape, and had a high-resolution macro camera around her neck. She spent 2 hours documenting the stump of my oak. She counted rings, measured the diameter, and took core samples of the wood to prove health.
"He's a fool, Arthur," Sarah said, wiping her hands as she finished. "This wasn't just wood. This was a Class A landscape specimen. According to the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers' methods, the value is going to be astronomical." "Give me a ballpark," I said. "I'll need to run the math on the replacement cost, which involves the cost of sourcing, transporting, and planting a tree of similar maturity. We're looking at well over 6 figures."
I nodded. "Good. I need that report by tomorrow. In the meantime, I have a delivery to make." I went to my office and drafted a formal cease and desist and notice of claim. I didn't use emotional language. I wrote, "Notice is hereby given that your agents have committed a timber trespass per state statute section 12.34. Preliminary forensic survey indicates the destruction of property located at GPS coordinates. Demand is hereby made that all construction activities within 20 feet of the property line cease until a full boundary audit is completed. Be advised that we are seeking full restoration costs and treble damages." I printed it, placed it in a heavy envelope, and drove to the post office. I didn't just mail it. I sent it certified mail, restricted delivery, return receipt requested. This is the death token in legal warfare. It ensures that Julian Vance cannot claim he never saw it or that his secretary lost it. The postman would have to look Julian Vance in the eye and make him sign for it. When I got home, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail. I didn't answer.
Arthur, it's Julian. His voice sounded tight, impatient. I saw the lady with the camera. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've got a concrete pour scheduled for 6:00 a.m. tomorrow. My site manager says you're surveying near our excavation line. Stay on your side of the fence. I'm increasing the settlement offer to $1,000. Take it or leave it, but don't get in the way of progress. A tree is just wood, pal. Don't be that neighbor.
I saved the recording to 3 different cloud drives. Don't be that neighbor. It was a classic narcissist's tactic, framing the victim's self-defense as a nuisance. To Julian, my property rights were a game. My grandfather's legacy was just wood. At 4:30 p.m., I saw the mail truck pull into the construction site across the street. I watched from my porch as the carrier walked up to the trailer. Julian Vance stepped out, looking annoyed. He signed the electronic pad. He took the envelope. I watched him open it. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the moment his posture changed. He didn't look angry, he looked confused. Then he looked at the stump. Then he looked at me. I didn't wave. I didn't scowl. I just sat there, holding my moleskine, and wrote down the time of service. He crumpled the letter and threw it into the dirt. Big mistake. In my state, ignoring a formal notice of timber trespass and proceeding with construction is the definition of willful and malicious intent. It turns simple damages into treble damages. It turns a civil dispute into a life-altering financial judgment. Julian Vance thought he was throwing away a piece of paper. He was actually throwing away his clean hands' defense. The concrete trucks were still scheduled for tomorrow. He was going to build his foundation anyway. He was going to pour 20 tons of cement right next to a disputed line, ignoring a certified warning. He was pouring himself into a hole he'd never be able to climb out of. The first warning was officially on the record. Now the trap was set. Tomorrow, Julian would pour the concrete, and the day after, I'd introduce him to Marcus Thorne. Sarah Jenkins' report arrived in my inbox at 8:00 a.m. Wednesday. It was 42 pages of cold, biological carnage. The title was Forensic Valuation Report, QERCUS Alba 42 Main SD. She hadn't just appraised a tree, she'd appraised an ecosystem. She used the trunk formula method. Since you cannot physically buy a 30-inch diameter, 100-year-old oak, the value is derived from the basic price of the largest available nursery tree, adjusted for trunk area. The base value, $184,500. Location contribution plus 20%. Species rating, 90%. The total replacement value of the tree, $214,200, but Sarah didn't stop there. She included the cost of site restoration. The grand total for a single tree, $242,000. I felt a ghost of a smile tug at my lips. In his voicemail, Vance had called it just wood. He'd estimated the fine at $500. He was off by a factor of nearly 500. And then there was the treble damages statute. In our state, if the destruction of timber is willful or malicious, the court must award 3 times the value. $242,000 multiplied by 3 is $726,000. That's more than the cost of the land Vance's condo was sitting on. I picked up the phone and called Marcus Thorne. Marcus is what people call a shark, but that's an insult to sharks. Sharks are driven by hunger. Marcus is driven by the precise application of the law.
Arthur, Marcus's voice was like gravel in a blender. I saw the report Jenkins sent over. That white oak was a beauty. I remember seeing it when I visited your father years ago.
Vance cut it down for a sightline, I said. He signed for the cease and desist yesterday. This morning at 6:00 a.m., the concrete trucks arrived. He's pouring the foundation for the south building as we speak.
He ignored a certified cease and desist. Marcus actually chuckled. It sounded like dry leaves skittering on a grave. That's lovely. That's willful on a silver platter. He didn't just kill a tree, Arthur. He committed a 7-figure error.
I walked out to my back deck. The air was thick with the smell of wet cement and diesel exhaust. 2 massive mixers were idling, their drums spinning. A pump truck was snaking a boom over the excavation pit. Julian Vance was there, wearing a shiny new hard hat and a neon vest that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust. He was high-fiving the foreman. He looked victorious. He'd won. He saw me and pointed, saying something to the foreman. They both laughed. I raised my camera. I used a 200 telephoto lens. I captured the wet concrete sliding into the forms. I captured the GPS sync timestamp on my digital display.
It was 4 feet. He wasn't just in the setback zone. He was 6 feet into the no-build area. "Enjoy the view, Arthur," Vance shouted over the roar of the trucks. "Progress waits for no one."
"I'm enjoying it very much, Julian," I called back, and I was, because I wasn't looking at a luxury condo. I was looking at a $10 million pile of concrete that, within 6 months, I would force him to break apart with jackhammers.
I went back inside and sent the photos to Marcus. Marcus replied instantly, "Then the trap is closed. I'm filing the suit in the Lee's Pendens this afternoon. By tomorrow morning, Julian Vance's bank is going to have a very difficult conversation with him."
At 10:00 a.m. Thursday, the world stopped for Julian Vance. He just didn't know it yet. Marcus Thorne had moved with the speed of a falling guillotine. By 2:00 p.m. the previous day, he had filed the lawsuit in the county superior court. The charges were timber trespass, willful destruction of property, and zoning encroachment. But the real weapon wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the Lee's Pendens. In the real estate world, a Lee's Pendens is a cloud on the title. It is a public notice filed with the county recorder that says, "This land is the subject of a legal dispute. If you have a Lee's Pendens on your property, no bank will touch you. No title insurance company will issue a policy." The radio on the construction site was cut. The roar of the excavators died down. I saw the foreman, a burly man named Mike, walking toward Vance's trailer with a cell phone pressed to his ear. He looked panicked.
5 minutes later, Vance burst out of the trailer. He wasn't wearing his shiny hard hat anymore. He was holding a stack of papers and screaming into his phone. "What do you mean frozen? It's a neighbor dispute. It's a goddamn tree. How can they freeze a $10 million credit line over a $500 fine?" He was pacing, his face the color of a ripe beet. "I don't care about the cloud. Clear it. Call the bank's VP."
I watched as the concrete trucks, which had been lined up for the second pour, began to back up and leave. The drivers didn't care about Vance's progress. They cared that the company's corporate account was flagged.
Vance spotted me. He didn't just walk over, he charged. He stopped at the property line, his chest heaving. "You think you're clever, don't you, Penhaligon? You think you can stop a $10 million project with some legal mumbo-jumbo? My lawyers are going to have this Lee's Pendens thrown out by noon tomorrow, and then I'm going to sue you for every penny you have. I'll take your house. I'll turn your precious little yard into a parking lot."
I stood up slowly. I kept my hands open and visible. I didn't raise my voice. "The mumbo-jumbo is a formal claim for timber trespass and zoning violations, Julian," I said. "The tree you cut was valued at over $200,000. Under the Treble damages statute, that's $700,000, plus the restoration costs, plus the legal fees. My survey shows you poured within the 10-foot setback. You're 6 feet over the line. That building is illegal, Julian." Vance lunged forward, his hand reaching for the collar of my shirt. I didn't flinch. Click. The 4K security camera mounted on my porch eaves captured the entire thing. The red light was blinking. "That's assault, Julian," I said softly. "In this state, that's a criminal charge. If you touch me, the police will be here in 5 minutes. And I'm sure the bank would love to see their developer's mugshot on the evening news."
Vance pulled his hand back as if I were made of white-hot iron. He was shaking. For the first time, he realized he wasn't in a negotiation. He was in a trap. "What do you want?" he hissed. "50,000 cash, right now."
"The offer is rejected," I said. "I'm not interested in your cash, Julian. I'm interested in justice. And justice, according to my lawyer, is going to cost you a lot more than 50,000. I turned and walked back into my house. If the first rule of warfare is to know your enemy, the second is to know how they'll try to cheat when they start losing. Julian Vance didn't just sit in his trailer and sulk after the Lee's Pendens froze his credit line. By Monday morning, I was served with a thick stack of papers by a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Vance's lawyers had fired back with a strategic lawsuit against public participation, or a SLAPP suit. They were suing me for $20 million, alleging tortious interference with business relations and defamation of character. The logic was classic corporate intimidation. Frame my legitimate property claim as a malicious attempt to ruin a multi-million-dollar development.
They hoped the sheer number of zeros in the damages would make me blink. I didn't blink, I made coffee. Arthur, Marcus Thorne said when I called him to report the service, don't even read the complaint. It's a work of fiction designed to scare a man who doesn't understand civil procedure. They're claiming you maliciously misrepresented the property line to trigger a bank audit. The beauty of this is that in a tortious interference case, truth is an absolute defense.
By filing this, Vance has opened the door for us to perform discovery on his internal emails much sooner than I expected. He's also sent security to the line, I said, looking out my kitchen window. Two men in black tactical gear were standing on the construction side of the property line, right where the oak used to be. They were staring at my house. One of them was holding a large, professional-grade video camera pointed directly at my back deck.
They're trying to bait you, Marcus warned. They want you to come out there and yell. They want you to brandish a weapon or even just a garden tool. Anything they can use to file a restraining order against you to get you removed from the property. Stay inside, keep your own cameras running.
I followed the gray rock protocol to the letter. I didn't go out and confront them. I didn't close my blinds to show I was bothered. I set up a secondary recording station in my den and went about my day. At 3:00 p.m., one of the security guards stepped 3 inches over the property line. He stood on the edge of the stump, my stump, and lit a cigarette, blowing the smoke toward my sliding glass door. He then proceeded to spit on the heartwood of the oak. I didn't move. I zoomed in with the 4K camera. Vance walked out to join them. He looked at my house and made a very specific, very obscene gesture. Then he leaned over and whispered something to the guards, pointing at my porch. The counterattack wasn't just legal, it was psychological warfare. Vance was used to people folding when he applied pressure. He was used to the Karen response, the screaming neighbor who makes a scene and looks like a lunatic in court. That evening I received a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of my front door taken from the street. The caption read, "Nice house. Shame if the property value plummeted during a 20-year lawsuit."
I didn't reply. I forwarded the screenshot to Marcus and a contact I had in the district attorney's office. Arthur, Marcus called me back 5 minutes later. He's spiraling. That text is witness intimidation and extortion in this jurisdiction. He's so used to being the biggest bully in the room that he's forgotten that the room has ears. Keep the logs tight. We're moving the deposition up. He thinks he's attacking us, but all he's doing is providing the rope for his own hanging.
In every corrupt ecosystem, there is a rotten root, the person who knows where the bodies are buried because they were the one who held the shovel. Benny Rossi contacted me through an encrypted messaging app. He didn't use his real name at first. He just said, "I was the site manager for the Phase 1 pour. I have the digital logs Vance deleted." We met at a nondescript diner 3 towns over. I arrived early and performed a sweep for recording devices. Habit is a hard thing to break. Benny was a man who looked like he'd been chewed up by the construction industry and spat out. He had calloused hands and a nervous twitch in his left eye.
"Julian is a snake, Mr. Penhaligon," Benny said, not touching his coffee. "I worked for him for 6 years. I saw him bribe inspectors in the hills. I saw him use substandard rebar in the garage of the Lincoln project."
But what he did to your tree, that was the first time he put it in writing. "In writing?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Benny pulled a thumb drive from his pocket and slid it across the table.
"Julian is a narcissist. He likes to micromanage via email because he thinks he's commanding his troops. 2 weeks before the oak came down, he sent an email to the architect and me. He'd seen the shadow study for the penthouses.
That tree was going to block the sunset view for the most expensive unit. He told us to find a way to make it disappear and that he didn't care about the fines. Did he mention the property line? I asked.
Benny nodded. The architect warned him, said the survey showed the oak was on your side. Vance's reply was, old man Penhaligon is 80. He won't know the difference. Just fell it at dawn and have a check ready. It's cheaper than a redesign.
I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. In a timber trespass case, willful and malicious intent is the difference between a slap on the wrist and financial ruin. An email proving he knew the tree wasn't his and ordered it destroyed anyway was the smoking gun.
Why are you giving me this, Benny? Because he fired me yesterday, Benny spat. Told me I was too soft because I refused to sign off on the foundation pour next to your line.
He's trying to blame me for the Lee's Pendens. He's going to use me as a scapegoat when the bank starts looking for heads to roll. I took the drive. You realize that if I use this, you'll have to testify.
I want to testify, Benny said. I want to be the one who hammers the last nail in his coffin. I went home and plugged the drive into an air-gapped laptop. The data was a gold mine.
It wasn't just the email about the oak. There were photos of the site markers being moved by hand in the middle of the night. There were PDF copies of the official survey Vance had submitted to the city, which had been crudely photoshopped. This was no longer a neighbor dispute. This was uttering a forged instrument and document fraud. I called Marcus. We don't just have the tree anymore, Marcus. We have the foundation of his entire company. He forged the city survey.
Arthur, Marcus's voice was uncharacteristically quiet. If what you're saying is true, he's not just looking at a civil judgment. He's looking at a criminal indictment. This project won't just be delayed, it will be condemned.
In the machinery of the city, there is no gear more powerful or more stubborn than a building inspector with a point to prove. Julian Vance's building permit was predicated on a 10-foot setback from my residential property line. If he built even a fraction of an inch into that buffer zone without a variance, the building was non-compliant. If he built it based on a forged survey, the permit was void from the start, as if it never existed. At 9:00 a.m. on Wednesday, I stood on my lawn with Robert Grizzly Adams. Robert was a 30-year veteran of the Department of Building and Safety. He earned his nickname because he had the temperament of a bear waking up from winter.
Vance, huh? Robert grumbled, squinting at the fresh concrete across the street. He's a frequent flyer in my office, always trying to squeeze an extra floor or a tighter setback out of a parcel. What's the issue, Penhaligon?
The property line is here, I said, pointing to my GPS-verified iron pin. And that foundation wall is exactly 4 feet from it. Robert looked at the pin. He looked at the foundation. He pulled out a heavy industrial-grade steel tape.
4 feet 2 inches, Robert muttered. Permit says 10. He's missing 6 feet of mandatory setback. And here is the survey he submitted for the permit, I said, handing Robert a printed copy of the forged document Benny Rossi had given me. Robert took the 2 papers. He looked back and forth between them for a long, silent minute. The air around him seemed to grow colder. This line here, Robert pointed to the forged survey, this isn't just an error. This is a deliberate relocation of a registered boundary. He moved your property into his lot on paper. He also felled a 100-year-old oak to make the site match the lie, I added.
Robert folded the papers and tucked them into his clipboard. He didn't say another word to me. He walked across the street. I watched the drama unfold. Vance saw Robert and immediately went into charm mode. He tried to shake Robert's hand. Robert kept his hands on his clipboard. Vance started talking, gesturing wildly. Robert simply pointed at the foundation and then at the property pin. Then Robert pulled a large, neon-orange sticker from his bag. It was the scarlet letter of the construction world, a stop work order. Robert slapped it onto the side of Vance's construction trailer. Then he walked to the foundation and slapped another one on the wet concrete.
Vance was screaming now. You can't do this. I have a permit. I have a $10 million loan in the balance. You don't have a permit, Vance. Robert's voice carried like a thunderclap. You have a fraudulent application and a gross zoning violation. Until you move this wall 6 feet back, not a single tool touches this dirt. If I see a worker on this site after noon, I'm calling the sheriff.
Robert walked back to his truck, ignoring Vance's threats. Vance stood in the middle of his silent construction site, staring at the orange stickers. The progress had stopped. I told Marcus, let him bleed. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a failed construction site. It's the sound of money evaporating. For Julian Vance, the setback crisis was a death spiral. To fix it, he would have to jackhammer out 20 tons of reinforced concrete, re-excavate the site, and move the entire building footprint 6 feet to the north. But the north side was already at the edge of his other setback line. In his greed to maximize the footprint of the penthouse units, Vance had designed a building that literally could not fit on the lot if he followed the law. Now, the space was gone, and the concrete was a permanent reminder of his theft.
Thursday morning, Marcus Thorne called me. Vance's attorney, a guy named Sterling, just sent over a final settlement offer, Marcus said. They're offering $100,000 for the tree, a formal apology, and a boundary easement. They want me to sell him the land they already tried to steal, I said. Essentially, they're desperate, Arthur. Sterling sounded like he was hyperventilating. The bank is threatening to call the entire loan due. What's our counter? I asked. Our counter is silence, Marcus said. We don't respond to the $150,000. We don't acknowledge the easement. We wait for the deposition on Friday. I want Vance under oath.
I spent the rest of the day in my garden. I sat near the stump of the oak. Without the canopy, the afternoon sun was brutal. My ferns were wilting. The privacy I'd enjoyed for 30 years was gone.
Around 4:00 p.m., his Range Rover pulled up to the property line. He didn't get out. He lowered the window and looked at me. "You're a miserable old man, Penhaligon," he shouted across the yard.
You'd rather see 10 families lose their future homes and 50 workers lose their jobs than admit you lost a tree. Is that it? Is that your justice? I stood up and brushed the dirt from my knees. The workers lose their jobs because you forged a survey, Julian, I said. The families lose their homes because you built a building that doesn't fit the law. I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself.
"I'll bury you," he screamed, his face turning that familiar, dangerous shade of red. "I'll spend every cent I have to make sure you never sleep a night in peace again."
You're already spending it, Julian, I said softly. At $20,000 a day, I'd say you're about halfway to the bottom. He peeled out, his tires kicking up gravel. I couldn't wait. A deposition is a ritual of self-destruction for the arrogant. We were in a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of a downtown law firm. Julian Vance sat across from Marcus Thorne. He was flanked by 3 high-priced litigators in charcoal suits. I sat next to Marcus, my moleskine open, my expression a gray rock mask of professional detachment. In the corner sat a man in a plain blue suit.
That was Detective Miller from the DA's white-collar crime unit. His presence was a silent ticking clock. "Mr. Vance," Marcus began, his voice smooth and dangerous, "let's talk about the property line."
"You've maintained in your filings that the white oak was on the boundary, is that correct?" "That's what my site manager told me," Vance said, his jaw tight. "I'm a developer. I don't pull the tape myself."
"I see in this expert site manager. That would be Benny Rossi. Yes, but he was incompetent. That's why I fired him." Marcus leaned forward, sliding a document across the polished mahogany table. "This is the survey you submitted to the city building department. It shows the property line 10 feet further south than the county parcel map. Did you rely on an expert for this as well?" Vance glanced at the paper. "That's the survey we were given. I assume it's accurate." "You assume," Marcus smiled. "Mr. Vance, we have the metadata from the original CAD file. It was edited on a laptop registered to your personal office 3 days before the filing. The expert who signed it has already informed us that he never authorized this version of the map."
Vance's lead lawyer, Sterling, jumped in. "Objection, my client isn't a technical expert. This is a matter of administrative error, not intent." "Administrative error?" Marcus smiled.
"Mr. Vance, I'm going to play an audio file for you. It's from your own voicemail system, recovered via subpoena from your service provider." Marcus hit play on his laptop.
Vance's voice filled the room. "Sterling, tell the architect to just move the line on the PDF. Penhaligon is an old man. He's not going to audit the city files. Just get it done."
The silence in the room was absolute. Vance's face went from pale to ghostly. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said softly, "did you just hear yourself ordering the forgery of a city document?"
Vance opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Detective Miller in the corner. Miller was now taking notes. I was frustrated," Vance stammered. "It was a figure of speech."
"And the oak tree," Marcus interrupted. "Was it a figure of speech when you told Benny Rossi to fell it at dawn because the fine was cheaper than a redesign? We have that email too, Julian." Vance stood up, his chair screeching. "This is a setup. I'm not answering any more questions." "Sit down, Julian," Marcus said, "because the next time we speak, it will be in front of a grand jury."
Vance sank back into his chair. He looked broken. "We want the stop work order lifted," Sterling whispered. "If we agree to move the wall, if we pay for the tree."
"The tree is $700,000, Marcus said. "The restoration is another 100. And as for the stop work order, I believe Robert Adams is recommending a total revocation of your permit."
Vance buried his face in his hands. The deposition wasn't over, but the war was. I stood by the window looking down at the city. I wasn't just going for his money, I was going for his land. In the legal world, there is a difference between a judgment and enforcement. A judgment says you owe money. Enforcement is the state showing up to take it. The morning of the final hearing was gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes stone buildings look like fortresses. Julian Vance arrived not in his Range Rover, which had been repossessed by the bank 48 hours prior, but in a taxi. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance had been replaced by a hollow, frantic vibration, the look of a man who had realized that his friends at City Hall were nowhere to be found. Marcus Thorne stood beside me, his hands behind his back, looking like a statue of justice himself. We weren't here for a trial. We were here for a summary judgment on the timber trespass and a mandatory injunction regarding the zoning violations. Judge Miller did not waste time. He was a man who had seen 1,000 greedy developers pass through his court, but few had the audacity to forge a city document. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, looking at Vance's lawyer over his spectacles, "I have read your brief. You suggest that the destruction of the 100-year-old white oak was an operational error. However, the evidence, specifically the email chain and the metadata from the forged survey, indicates a premeditated, willful act of destruction for commercial gain. Is that correct?" Sterling tried to speak, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, my client was under immense pressure. The law does not have a pressure exception for timber trespass," the judge interrupted. "The valuation provided by Dr. Jenkins is $242,000. Under state statute, I find the intent to be willful and malicious. I am awarding treble damages. That is $726,000. I am also awarding full restoration costs of $85,000 and legal fees."
Vance's head dropped into his hands, $923,000 for a single tree, but Marcus Thorne wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we have a second motion regarding the foundation. This was the nuclear option. A fine can be paid, a building, however, must be legal."
"Regarding the zoning encroachment," the judge continued, his voice hardening, "the court has reviewed the chief building inspector's report. The foundation wall for Vance Luxury Estates is 6 feet inside the mandatory residential setback. It was built based on a fraudulent permit. The court hereby issues a mandatory injunction. Mr. Vance, you have 30 days to remove the non-compliant portion of the structure. If it is not removed, the city is authorized to perform the demolition at your expense."
Vance looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Remove it. It's a reinforced concrete slab. It's the spine of the whole south building. If I cut 6 feet off that, the structural integrity is gone. The whole thing will have to be scrapped." "Then I suggest you get a very large jackhammer, Mr. Vance," the judge said coldly. "Court is adjourned." Vance collapsed back into his seat as the room cleared. He looked at me as I walked past. "You've killed the project, Arthur. $3 million in sunk costs. $10 million in loans called due."
"You've ruined a dozen investors. For what? A stump." "For the line, Julian," I said, my voice low and steady. "You thought the line was a suggestion. I'm just making sure you remember exactly where it is." The next Monday, the silence of the construction site was broken, but it wasn't the sound of progress. It was the sound of destruction. The bank had hired a demolition crew to clear the site of the illegal structures. The hydraulic breakers bit into the foundation. Thump, thump, thump. The concrete cracked, the rebar screaming as it was twisted and snapped. Julian Vance was there, standing on the sidewalk, watched by 2 sheriff's deputies. He was just a spectator to his own bankruptcy. Every strike of the jackhammer was another dollar he owed the bank. The clean hands doctrine is a shield for the innocent, but for the guilty, the law is a scorched earth policy. 6 months had passed since the first jackhammer hit the concrete. For Julian Vance, it was the time it took for the system to finish digesting him. Marcus Thorne had been surgical. Because Vance had personally ordered the forgery and the timber trespass, he was held personally liable for the $923,000 judgment. It's called piercing the corporate veil. He didn't have it. His luxury home in the hills was sold at a sheriff's auction for $1.4 million. After his primary mortgage was paid off, every cent of the remaining equity was wired directly into my legal trust account. His Range Rover, his collection of high-end watches, all of it was liquidated. I received a final check for $840,000, but I didn't feel rich. I felt precise. The construction site across the street was now a vacant lot. The luxury estates sign had been replaced with a for sale sign by the bank. Nobody was buying. Instead, I used a portion of the settlement to transform my own lot. We removed the old stump, painstakingly by hand so as not to damage the surrounding earth. In its place, we didn't plant 1 tree. We planted 5 mature specimens. They formed a legacy grove. In 20 years, they would knit together into a canopy that would shade this house for another century. I also endowed a scholarship at the local university for forensic surveying and environmental ethics. The final news of Julian Vance came in a small clipping in the business section. Former developer sentenced to 18 months for document fraud. He had become the case study for why you don't mess with tree law. I was sitting on my porch, the same place I'd sat when the chainsaws started. The new oaks were swaying in the breeze, their leaves a vibrant, healthy green. A car pulled up at the curb. It was Benny Rossi. He found a stable, honest role in public works.
It looks good, Arthur, Benny said, leaning against my fence. The trees, they look like they belong here. They do, Benny, I said. They have deep roots. I heard Vance is out in 6 months with good behavior, Benny said, looking at the vacant lot. Think he'll come back? I looked at my moleskine resting on the table beside me. The last entry was simple, case closed, boundaries restored.
Let him come, I said. I still have the survey equipment, and the law hasn't changed a bit. Benny laughed, nodded, and drove away. I sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows of the new oaks stretching across the lawn. Julian Vance thought he could buy the future by destroying the past. He thought a $500 fine was the price of his hubris. He was wrong. The price of his hubris was everything he owned. I closed my eyes and listened to the leaves. The end. Case study: The Oak of Justice Strategy. Lessons in Strategic Warfare and Systemic Justice. The conflict between Arthur Penhaligon and Julian Vance serves as a masterclass in how individuals can utilize bureaucracy and law to defeat institutional bullies. One executive summary: the conflict. The case began with a material violation, the intentional destruction of a 100-year-old white oak tree. Julian Vance viewed legal fines as the cost of doing business rather than deterrence. Arthur Penhaligon utilized systemic overreach to trigger total collapse. 2 core methodologies: the cold justice playbook. The Gray Rock Protocol. Arthur's primary psychological weapon was static passivity. By remaining a gray rock, Arthur forced Vance to become dynamic and aggressive. Arrogance leads to overreach. Overreach leads to evidence. Actionable value: never argue with a bully. Every word you speak in anger is a weapon you've handed them. Silence combined with a 4K camera is the ultimate counterattack. Be the system as a weapon. Arthur did not seek revenge, he sought enforcement. Arthur leveraged specific legal instruments: timber trespass, the Lee's Pendens trap, and zoning setbacks. Identify the regulatory lever. A bully might not fear you, but they fear the bank and the building inspector. See technical authority. Arthur recruited competence assets like a consulting arborist and a shark attorney. In the Western legal system, the person with the best experts usually wins. Expert testimony transforms he said, she said into the data says. 3. The nuclear option, piercing the veil. By proving Vance committed fraud, Arthur was able to pierce the corporate veil. This allowed the court to seize personal assets. 4. Final takeaway, the power of the line. Julian Vance thought the line was a suggestion. Arthur proved it was a law of nature. If you find yourself in a similar conflict, remember Arthur's golden rule. Don't tell them they're wrong. Measure exactly how wrong they are and send the bill via certified mail.